Dr. Chitra Ramamurthy, co-convener Dr. Jayasri Barua, and the moderator Indu Pandey. Good morning. I think we have to break for tea or what? People are all left. Indu, are you over here? You are the moderator today. And we have beautiful cases lined up here, and there are all situations who are difficult, and everybody like to manage such cases in life. Let me read out the names of our presenters first. We have Dr. Madhumita Prasad, Vijendra Prasad Kashyap. I can't see them here. Dr. Bajaj, Sajid, Dr. Mohan Rajan, he is also not available here. Dr. Sanjeev, aa jao chair mein bhaiya. We have Dr. Rakesh is here. Dr. Partha Biswas, Dr. Rakesh Sakia, Dr. Rajat Mathur. And I think people are going to come slowly. We have Dr. Madhumita Prasad here. Those who are not there, they may not get a chance later, because the session is getting shorter and shorter. Next.
Should the hall coordinators be calling up the speakers? Kashyap is not. Dr. Ashish Bajaj is here? Yes. And Dr. Sajjad is not there. Dr. Rakesh Akia is also here. So we'll get going. Others will come. We can't.
Morning to all. At the outset, I'd like to thank AIOS and the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity. So I'll be talking on cataract surgery in coloboma and microcornea. So as we know, coloboma is a failure of the embryonic fissure, and cataract generally develops at an early stage. We have very hard cataracts, zonular weakness, poorly dilating pupils, and also the biometry is quite difficult in these cases, and the working space is limited. So your surgical planning has to be meticulous. You must have high molecular weight OVDs, vitrectomy machine, knowledge of SICS is also important, and importantly, capsular supporting devices. Choice of IOL, again, in our experience, we have seen that you should avoid very large plate haptics and 4-aptic IOLs because the trailing haptic, it tends to tear the rhexis margin when you enter in. So this was a study done at our center, about 280 eyes. So whether you do SICS or phaco is an individual choice, but normally if the corneal diameter is small and the cataracts are harder, it's better to do an SICS. Whether relatively softer cataracts and larger corneal diameters, it's good to do a phaco. So this is the first case. You can see a hard cataract. So we tend to make both the side ports initially because we expect a vitrectomy might be needed. Then a phonic space flap and a large scleral tunnel is made. In this case, the internal dissection is very important, and the internal tunnel should be, and you can see that large zonular dialysis there pre-existing. A large rhexis must be made, especially in the superior side. The nucleus is prolapsed out. So in this, don't prolapse out the whole nucleus because the space is limited, and then a gentle delivery is done. Again, we do a bimanual in this because we have a phaco machine available, and take the cortex in the colobomatous area last of all. CTR is implanted with a bimanual technique. Another important thing in this is to do a bimanual implantation of the IOL as well, so that the leading haptic, it goes into the bag. So you can confirm this. So this is another case, a relatively hard cataract, small cornea, very shallow AC. So capsule is stained. Again, a large tunnel must be made. And side pocket dissection is very important in these cases. So in this case, I decided to put iris hooks because the pupil size was small. And again, the rhexis was made. A large rhexis is aimed at. Hydrodissection is done, the nucleus is prolapsed out. You must remove the iris hooks before you do the nucleus delivery, and a traction from the rectus is very important. Again, the IOL in the bag was implanted. So since the tunnel was slightly on the larger side, I decided to suture it. So this is another case. You can see the cornea size is good and the cataract is relatively of a lower grade, so decided to do a phaco in this. So the incision should be slightly limbal in this case. And the trick is to complete the rhexis in the colobomatous area last of all, so as to avoid extension and have more of the ripping forces when you're making the rhexis. So adequate rhexis was there, hydrodissection is done. So the surgery has to be slower as compared to the normal cases, and a modified stop and chop was used. And one pie is removed to make space in the bag. Again, cortex aspiration, very gentle, and last of all in the area of zonular weakness. In this, there was no zonular weakness, so decided to go ahead with the IOL implantation. But the key here is orient the haptic in the area of the zonular weakness. So this is another case. So you can see there is a pre-existing 3 to 4 hour clock hour zonular weakness, and NS3 grade cataract is there. So in this, the rhexis is initiated with a cystitome because the capsule is very lax. Again, I completed the rhexis last of all in the area of coloboma. Hydrodissection is gently done and rotation. So in this, I decided to implant the CTR before going in for the phaco to stabilize the bag. Again, modified stop and chop was done, and your parameters, you have to slightly adjust them. Bottle height has to be decreased because you already have a zonular weakness sitting there, and you also have a fluid misdirection in this if you have a too large bottle height. So before exiting the probe, put in the viscoelastic, and then again, the cortex is aspirated, last of all in the colobomatous area, and a single piece lens is implanted. Haptic is again oriented in the area of the zonular weakness. So this is another case. The cataract grade is slightly more NS4, and there is a 2 clock hour zonular weakness inferiorly. Slightly larger axis is aimed at because you might need to convert to SICS if a complication occurs. Again, hydrodissection is done. And always ensure that free rotation of the nucleus is there, otherwise you will have complications. In this, we do something known as the crater and chop, whereas a crater is made, the first chop is achieved, and the chop is done, and the phacoemulsification is completed. Again, cortex aspiration is the same. So in this, I found the bag laxity was there, so CTR was implanted after the phaco was completed. So it should be started opposite to the area of the zonular weakness. Again, a handshake technique is adopted, and the CTR is implanted, and finally the lens is placed in position. So this is the last case. It's a post-retinal detachment. Colobomas tend to have retinal detachments, and you can see silicone oil inside there. Silicone oil is washed out. This is a very soft cataract, young patient, extremely difficult to manage sometimes with the epinuclear plate sitting there. So hydrodelineation was also done. Not much phaco energy was needed, but I had a lot of struggle. And finally, the epinucleus was removed, cortex was removed, the pupil size had gone down, so, and the IOL was implanted. So the key in these cases is meticulous planning, choice of the surgical procedure, and the capsular support. So you must know when to implant the CTR. It should be as late as you can, but as early as you must. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very nicely depicted videos, but 2-3 points which you can add is, one is these are very small eyes, so it makes sense to decompress the vitreous before we start the surgery, which you must have done, and also to inject viscoelastic in that area of zonular dialysis, because that will plug the vitreous and fluid misdirection can be avoided. These are some things
And
which
we don't tend to use dye in all cases because it goes
dye
into the
will go behind and red
cavity
reflex will
yes.
go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very nice videos.
Thank you.
Who we shall have Dr. Ashish Bajaj? Huh? Oh, sorry, you did it. Sajjad Hamid is not there. Dr. Lakesh? Yes. And after Lakesh, Dr. Shakya, you should get your video set. Dr. Titya uske baad ho jayega. The hall coordinators are here. Hall coordinators are not here. नहीं बाकी स्पीकर्स को नाम फोन करके बुलाएंगे.
LC Mataria. नहीं ये तो आप ही कह रहे हैं.
First, beginners must know.
हाँ yes. Good morning, chairperson, co-chairperson, and the dignitaries sitting in the dais. This is the phaco in the hypermature cataract. This is a video assisted, and the first. Yeah, we have made a main incision up to 2.2. As we all know, the challenge is in the hypermature cataract is the rhexis and then the phacoemulsification. For staining the entire capsule, we have put the tryptophan blue and it is washed away by putting the methyl cellulose. Then the next part, which is very important, is the capsular axis. With the help of the 26 case, then viscose is again injected, and with the help of the microcapsular axis forceps, the rhexis was. This is the time when it can extend, but as with the help of the high molecular visco, this rhexis was completed successfully. Then there's some loose, as it is a hypermature, some loose cortex is there, but epinucleus is very much less. So this loose, little liquefied cortex is aspirated, and this is again important steps because sometimes in hypermature the zonules are weaker, so we have to go very gently. Then by this we are making the trenching we are doing. We can see how the nucleus is moving. So with the left hand, with the chopper, we are trying to fix up the nucleus. So at least we can do some sort of, yes. Now it is still moving, so I shifted to the chopping. Yes, with the chop, after it is in the trenching, it was not completely separated because the posterior capsule is attached to, and yes, this place I could able to separate it, but yes, here again I could able to, because all the time this nucleus is moving, so it is we should not damage the zonule. So that part is very much important, and so only the 1/3 of the posterior capsule could not be separated. So we don't bother for that. Now we have started the phacoemulsification, and we are again injecting the high molecular visco, so there should not be any damage to the endothelium, as once the chamber is formed by the high molecular visco, the rest of the emulsification is done at the iris level. Now it is very easy to do the emulsification, because now as we are using the higher end machine, so for the last piece also we doesn't require to modify any parameters, and we are able to do with the same parameters as we, yes. After that we have done that small particle with then the next step, the putting the IOL is very easy, and after cleaning the posterior capsule and some part of the cortical matter is also that was there, it was cleaned. Then we put that as patient was willing for this suprafoveal lens, so I have put the suprafoveal lens, and once it has gone into the bag, and uneventful IOL was implanted, and this is the end of surgery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for showing all the salient points for the hypermature cataract. And Dr. Titya, would you always start off with a small rhexis in a hypermature cataract, or he had started off with a fairly large rhexis and he got away with it? Maybe the fluid cortex was not there. So would you take a chance, or would you do a ASOCT to find out whether there are fluid clefts and then plan your sizing of rhexis?
Yeah, Dr. Chitra nicely pointed out, like you have a term called white cataract that encompasses various types of a morphology of white cataract. It may start from the simple white cataract to hypermature. So that can be classified with your good clinical examination, which are those cases you have the raised interlenticular pressure, where you have a clefts, which are those cases which have a totally fluid after cataract, that is like hypermature cataract or a Morganian cataract. So good examination based on our anterior-chamber dynamics, that means the shallowness of anterior chamber, the convexity of anterior capsule. You can go do a slit, it gives you a morphology of what is behind the anterior capsule. If that is not so, then you should do anti-segment OCT to pixelize the type of white cataracts. Then classify them accordingly. You manage your cases, those cases.
Right.
Well, hypermature cases can be with thicker fluid. It can be totally fluid. It can be a very small nucleus. All these things can be very, very difficult also. In hypermature, as Dr. Chitra said, you make a puncture, the entire milky fluid comes out.
Yeah.
That will obscure your visibility. So you may have to exchange that milky fluid with a viscoelastic. Good staining is very, very compulsory in those cases. And getting the anterior capsule more flatter. That maybe injecting viscoelastic sometimes inside the bag also in a Morganian type. Always start smaller, then make it bigger.
Right.
Because if you start smaller, you have an opportunity to make it bigger to your desired size. Once we go a little bigger, especially once you cross the equator of a lens, then manipulation becomes very difficult in wide cataract.
Right.
So that we should understand, and the forceps is a very good idea to use in these cataract where the capsule is not flat.
Yes.
Forceps through the side port and not through the main port.
Oh, oh.
Also, I would like to ask if there is any role of intravenous hyperosmotics prior to surgery in
Pa-
such cases.
Pardon?
Any role of intravenous hyperosmotics prior to surgery in such
Hi.
cases? And how frequently, if it is desired?
No,
in such
if the
cases,
tension is high, then we can use we can use, otherwise, in
Here
this
I'm
case,
putting
in
her
this
intraventricular pressure.
Yeah, that will be useful in those cases where you have the, like a very small eye, hyperopic eyes or an anophthalmic eyes, where the entire the vitreous volume is larger than what you think. But if you want to decrease the intralenticular pressure, it will not get decreased by hyperosmotic. It will decrease the vitreous volume, but that will be helpful in the manipulation. Intralenticular pressure will be only decreased by opening the anterior capsule and getting the fluid out. So, but for that also, as you make a nick in the anterior capsule, depends how effectively you are managing the anterior chamber pressure. So if you work from the main wound, your viscoelastic comes out, then there will be a pressure from behind. Then in those cases, yes, you may be useful using the intravenous mannitol, especially like a patient with a phakomorphic cases, it will be useful. But routine standard cases, not very useful as such.
We call on our next speaker, Dr.
Thank
Jeevan
you.
Thytial. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank
Dr. Jeevan Thytial needs no introduction. He's our Vice President and is an extremely versatile surgeon. So we look forward to taking AIOS forward in his leadership.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chitra, for giving me direction to take the AIOS forward. People have done great work in this, and we are doing great in that area. We had, in the previous session, wonderful video from Dr. Hasur Tak talking about posterior polar cataract management. I remember Dr. Ramamurthy asking, what is the, how do I understand which are difficult cases, which are not difficult or simpler cases? Though as soon as you make a diagnosis of posterior polar cataract, it seems everything is difficult. But that's not very true. So we have to really understand the morphology of these posterior polar cataracts so that you can do an effective surgery for patient's benefit. So we all understand there's a high chances of posterior capsular opening during the phacoemulsification or any other cataract surgery, and that can cause the poor outcome in these cases also. So everything starts from the good slit lamp examination. So this is a diffuse light examination where you know that the typical characteristic feature of a posterior polar cataract, you have a reduplicated type of orientation, and beyond this central disc, you have a peripheral disc also. So this may be high risk quality of posterior polar cataract. Then a slit section also tells you the size of posterior polar cataract. It has been beautifully described by Jagatram et al. If you have a size which is bigger than 4 millimeter, they have a very high chances of posterior capsular opening during your surgery. And third important thing is the examination beyond the posterior capsule, where you have a disturbed anterior vitreous face with a lot of whitish granulation. That also indicates you have an open posterior capsule. And these are classically seen in the congenital variety of posterior polar cataract. What is missing here is the nucleus grade. If you have harder nucleus grade, more chances of complication. So slit lamp examination carefully under dilatation will give you a lot of information on the type of posterior polar cataract also. So this is the density of cataract, which is little on a harder side, which requires a different technology, and assessing these cases also. The other thing is to do an anterior-segment OCT in these cases. In fact, our teaching is all difficult cases, wide cataract, polar cataract, you must do OCT for all these cases, both anterior and posterior segment OCT if possible. So you have two ways. One is the clinical OCT for a OPD procedure wise, or if you have access to an intraop OCT, you can do OCT intraoperatively also with a microscope attachment or a femtosecond devices also. So these are various pictures of posterior polar cataract. You can see a duplicated cataract. Another area here, this looks like a typical posterior subcapsular variety of posterior polar cataract. And this is a case where you have an extension to the posterior side. So all these cases are very difficult to picturize what will happen. but that can be typically seen by assessing these cases. So this is one publication done by my junior colleague Dr. Amar Pujari, where we assessed 100 consecutive cases of posterior polar cataract undergoing cataract surgery in a senile variety and assessed the typical patterns. So if you see here, these are three pictures of a difficult morphology or typical posterior polar morphology. The one is conical shape. You can see the area density is quite thick and the shape is conical. And second is moth-eaten appearance, where the disc is larger size and nothing is visible beyond this posterior polar disc. And third is a ectatic deformity, where you have a combination of moth-eaten and the conical shape. So if you have these three types of morphology and anti-segment OCT, you have a very high chances of posterior capsule opening. So fortunately, these cases or these morphology, specific morphology are only seen in around 10% of cases. Rest 90% cases are the routine morphology of posterior polar cataract, where you can delineate the posterior capsule. The opening of a posterior capsule PCR ranges from 80 to 100% if you have these three varieties. So if you can assess this with anti-segment OCT before you take this patient for counseling and surgery, you will be much better off. Same thing was published in the same journal, that is the Journal of Cataract Refractive Surgery, where we described the intraoperative dynamics of a posterior polar cataract, which were assessed during the surgery. So one was you could see the morphology also, like this, which you could see with anti-segment OCT also, and one we did during the surgery also. So this is what Dr. Ramamurthy is talking about. If you can delineate the posterior capsule through the OCT, these are routine cases. You can do a routine surgery, hydrodissection, hydrodelineation, and surgery is over in 5 minutes. And this is a surgery which I'll skip. This is a type 2 variety, where peripherally you can delineate the posterior capsule, center a little difficult. Then these cases you have to be a little careful. And this is a type 3 variety, where you have a large posterior polar disc, harder nucleus, moth-eaten appearance, posterior capsule cannot be delineated center to periphery. There you have to be very, very careful not to really jump into doing a hydrodissection in these cases, because the PC is not clear in these cases. So I'm doing a 2 delineation here because nucleus is very hard, so delineation also becomes difficult. The idea here is to delineate the endonucleus core from the peripheral epinucleus cushion, so that you can safely do surgery in these cases also. If you see here the surgery wise, I could do a nice surgery here, complete the emulsification, and always decompress the fluid which is there, because sometimes this may be the way the capsule can get broken at that time also. So this is what sometimes you can see. This we describe as the posterior polar disc defect sign. If you have this defect, after you take out the nucleus in a defect in epicortex or cortex, so this is a sign that PC is intact in these cases. And you can definitely aspirate this without having compromisation. But whenever you don't see this disc defect, that means your PC, either it is open or there's no attachment in those cases also. Therefore, this technique of a nucleotomy is very, very useful, which Dr. Harsul nicely demonstrated, a chop and tumble technique. The basic idea there is to create the cushion of epinucleus. You can see this is a hydrodelineation I'm doing. You see in the OCT picture where you can do a delineation and get the endonucleus separated from the epicortical cushion. So this can be customized very, very effectively to this surgery. You can see here the primary chop. We'll take out a piece from there, and this will allow fluid it seep into between the epinucleus and the endonucleus. Subsequently, you can do just rotate the nucleus with your chop technique. You can see here, I'll just pull this nucleus to a centripetally, and you can take out this without rotation of a epicortical support system for a capsule. In this way, you can maintain the integrity of a weak posterior capsule till the end and complete the surgery also. And this technique is very useful in those cases where you have PC open, where you can create the cushion epicortex and come out very safely also. This technique can also be done in a femtosecond laser. You can see this is a posterior polar cataract. You can design the nucleus in a femtodelineation rings and the chop techniques, and that gives you safety in a surgery in these cases also. If you see, it is better to understand your cases before surgery rather than getting complication and creating difficulty for yourself or your patient. Always do anti-segment OCT for all post-polar cataracts. If you have intraoperative OCT, that will tell you, have you done a right delineation or not? Have you done hydrodissection by mistake? Where to rotate, where not to rotate is important. OCT also gives you a very clear indication which are those cases where you should avoid hydrodissection, do only delineation, or those cases you can do hydrodissection also. So don't go with the idea all posterior polar cataract you can't do hydrodissection. And chop and tumble technique is useful not only for posterior polar cataract, all type of cases where you want to retain the epinucleus core till the end. If you have femtosecond laser, that can be utilized for a safety, enhancing your safety for your patient also. So OCT is a very nice tool for all anti-segment surgery, including cataract surgery, and effectively that makes life simpler for all of us. Thank you for your kind listening.
So I just wanted to know one thing. In softer cataracts like this, we are very well aware that we are doing the hydrodelineation, and maybe we can do the delineation at 2-3 levels also. But what about the harder grades of cataracts where we have maybe a dense hard cataract where you know that you have a pre-existing dehiscence?
There also, as I said, you have to do a central, little bit of trench to get deeper, then do a chop. So that will create the space internally and it will separate the, the nucleus from the whatever cortex you have in those cases, and that will be retained. And take a two pieces, one pipe from here, one pipe this side, that will increase the area of separation, and fluid will seep in. Then you can just tumble the nucleus to center. So that is a good technique. People practice that. There are people who don't do hydro procedure at all for routine cases also. So you should practice that in normal cases first also, then go to difficult cases.
The biggest challenge is you can't rotate these lenses because you've not done a hydro, so you'll have to chop it as you see them. And try to get one piece out so the bag becomes a little more spacious for you to get the other pieces out. Very nice talk, Dr. Tityan. We go on to our next speaker, Dr. Rakesh Shakya. Dr. Rakesh, could you get connected? Yeah.
No, that is beautifully described by Abhay, and that can also be practiced. But as far as I am concerned, I am a single entry person. Don't like to come out before I have completed the surgery. The idea here also to have a fluid seep into the that space you have created. But if your nucleus is not coming out with your second-hand manipulation, in those cases, yes, you might have to do a internal hydrodelineation in those cases. Come out, don't come out immediately, use the viscoelastic from the side port, maintain the antechamber, then you come out with a handpiece. Use the either dispersive viscoelastic or a fluid to create the internal hydrodelineation in those cases also. And dispersive viscoelastic works very nicely in such cases. But it should be done only in those cases where your nucleus is not buzzing at all. If nucleus is getting free, don't have to come out.
Is Dr. Madhumita here? Dr. Rajat Madhu.
So good morning, respected chairperson, especially Kyal sir and Murthy madam and all. So myself, Dr. Rakesh Shakya, coming from the very small place, Chitrakoot.
It's a big place, yeah.
Actually, in the previous lecture, the subluxated cataract nicely covered. So I am going to the same technique in the very simple cases, not very complex cases. So as you know, that jointular compromise, the following trauma, surgery, and fluid exfoliation or systemic condition complicate the every step of the cataract surgery and pose the serious challenge in terms of safety and visual outcome. Depending upon the degree of the subluxation, the surgical procedure is chosen. Their capsule bag can be successfully preserved with the help of the capsular hooks. So newer technology including capsular tension rings, capsular fixation hooks, and have greatly improved the ability to remove these subluxated cataract through the anterior approach. Additionally, advanced and parameters in the new phagoemulsification unit also allow the safe removal of the subluxated cataract. So the three crucial steps of the cataract surgery can be defined: position of the self-sealing corneal incision, well-centered and intact capsular axis, and lens cracking and emulsification, also valuable in the complicated cases. So I am going to just a small video. Please give the volume, please. First, beginners must know about the anatomy of the jonular fiber that originate from the basal lamina of non-pigment epithelium of ciliary body and insert into the lens capsule at the equator region. These fibers play an important role in the lens stability. Its weakness results in alteration of the lens stability. Jonular dialysis may be pre-existing and brought into existence by the operating surgeon. Jonular compromise complicates every step of cataract surgery. Beginner faced serious challenges in terms of safety and visual outcome. The detection of the jonular dialysis at the earliest remains the crucial point which determines the subsequent management and final outcome of the surgery. I am going to demonstrate to manage various degree of jonular dialysis with the use of CTR in very simple two-Sinskey hook technique. CTR has two holes at each end. One end is inserted from the side port, so this leading end has to be engaged underneath the anterior capsule rim and gradually push the CTR with the help of McPherson forceps. So I take help of the both hands. Now when I have reached the trailing end, I take Sinskey hook in my left hand and goes through the left side port. Then insert the trailing end with the help of another Sinskey hook in my right hand. At this time, the left hand Sinskey hook always behind the CTR, and you can see how two Sinskey hook guide the CTR. Sometimes during the insertion of the CTR, trailing edge get released in the angle and become difficult to retrieve. In the process of retrieving of the CTR, it can cause iris trauma, bleeding and DM detachment. This was a 75-year-old female, had hypermature cataract with jonular dialysis more than 4 clock hours. A temporal clear corneal phaco with foldable intraocular lens implantation was planned for this patient. Anterior lens capsule stand by the minimal use of trypan blue to improve the visibility of the rhexis margin. 5.5 mm rhexis was fashioned, which is desirable size for the hard cataract. Hydrodissection not required. In this case, the capsular bag was stabilized by two capsular hooks placed in the area of the jonular dialysis, and phaco multiplication was done. So in this, I implanted CTR with the help of injector. I was noticed small PCR during IA without vitreous disturbance. So I implanted intraocular lens in the bag. Post-operative lens was centered with BCBA 6Y9. This was a case of traumatic subluxation more than 6 clock hours. I have planned clear corneal phaco with Cionni ring. Capsular access may be challenging due to absence of counter traction. After initial capsule tear with cystitome, I always apply shearing force with Atrata forceps toward the intact jonule to make circular access. Gentle hydrodissection done at multiple sites. Now capsular bag was stabilized by 3 capsular hooks placed in the area of jonular dialysis. After that, rotation of the lens became very easy, and phaco multiplication was done by modified stop and chop technique. After conjunctival peritomy, a small scleral groove made 3 mm away from the limbus. Cionni ring now used. This ring has additional suturing eyelet for scleral fixation. A 10-0 Prolene double arm suture is passed through the eyelet for the scleral fixation. And Cionni ring is introduced through the side port or main port and implanted into capsular bag with the help of McPherson and Sinskey hook. Ensure first eyelet goes into the capsular bag and rest of the ring gently dialed. Then 26 gauge needle is passed through the scleral bed about 2 mm away from the limbus. Prolene suture needle adopting into it at the pupillary center. Then needle with suture brought out through the scleral bed. Similarly, another needle with suture also brought out in the same way but placed 1 mm away from the first site. Ends of the prolene suture now tied together and secure the ring with the sclera by 7-8 knots. Now Sioni ring and capsular bag well centered. Intraocular lens implantation was done. Surgery in the presence of joint dialysis can be challenging situation for even the most experienced surgeon. So everyone should follow the following guidelines to get better results.
That was a very nice
Thank you so
talk,
much.
Dr. Rakesh, where you have shown all the principles of dealing with subluxations, very explicit. We shall go on to our next speaker, Dr. Partha Bishwas, who is going to be talking on microspherophakia, then and now.
Thank you.
So we have
I think in all cases of subluxation, the etiology is very important in such cases. So if we have post-traumatic cases, the remaining journals are healthy and intact. So surgery becomes simpler and your way of handling is also not very challenging. But if you have a disease which is progressive, then it is a question if you want to retain the bag or you want to get rid of bag and a fixation.
One other point is you should not have your rexus to be too small in a subluxated cataract, not too big, because you want enough rim of the CTR to be hidden by the rexus margin. But if the rexus becomes small, in case there's a future phimosis which happens, so sometimes it is even sensible on the table if you can make some small nicks on the rexus if you are courageous enough, or at least keep it in mind for a future YAG openings to be made on the capsule, because that is to be avoided. And in a traumatic cataract, as Dr. Tithial had said, we could be less particular about scleral fixation. You might get away with the CTR itself in most cases, because the remaining part of the zonules will take care that the IOL will continue to remain centered and fixed.
I think, if I ask the question to you, now with a lot of modification coming up in a fixation, scleral fixation, many people like to use a CTS, AMA CTS, use a routine CTR and use a CTS. That may be sometimes very handy, And what about the newer techniques of fixation? Do you do a Yamanese technique nowadays?
Yeah. Of course, Yamane techniques are taken care by our retina surgeons, but yes, that's been taken definitely a more center stage as against the routine scleral fixations which were done earlier.
We have some time here. Just a curiosity from my side, I am not very keen for a retrofixation of IOLs. So how many of you people are doing retrofixation on the audience?
I think
Six people.
No. There may be more. If maybe they are scared that you're youngsters who are scared that you'll ask questions. I think if the bag is severely dialyzed, instead of putting CTS and all the complex stabilizing thing, besides Yamane technique, both Yamane and iris fixation, you have to do an anterior vitrectomy. So that's there. So a shallow anterior vitrectomy is something all of us anterior segment surgeons are good at. And if you are ensuring it's a clear vitrectomy done, and if you're going to do a YAG, your small PI also, I think these cases do very well. Just that small dimple which you're seeing is enough. I don't think you might have to give them for an NSAIDs for a month extra.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for continuing the conversation and your tips while the glitch was there. This is microspherophakia, and I would like to draw your attention to this very rare anomaly, but once in a while, once in a lifetime, you are going to face this, and what we would be doing now and what we would be doing then is what I'm going to discuss today. So it's very important for us to know that microspherophakia we must not miss on the slit lamp, and a full examination needs to be done, right from the fact that this is associated with systemic anomalies. And these patients can have Alprots, can have Loeys, can have homocystinuria, can have Marfan's. And the systemic condition and a proper physician checkup is mandatory, because it's not the eye only, but it's also the systemic features that might be a more difficult situation for the patient. So when on the slit lamp, a microspherophakia comes and you have examined, and this is what the view is. It's like the ring of the edge of the microspherophakia that you would be seeing very, very well. And then you know that the anteroposterior diameter of this eye, of this lens, is much larger than the horizontal or vertical diameter. And this is an important aspect that we need to take care of. And look at this. This is a brilliant ring that you're seeing there. And during the surgery, you know that these surgical aspects are fraught with dangers. So what are they? There could have been an intraocular pressure rise because of crowding of the anterior chamber. I've had cases, in fact, I'm going to show you two sisters of the same family. And another sister of this particular family also had a lens corneal touch when she presented to me. So there are many ways that the presentation can be, but in this case, we are going to show you that what is the most difficult part of the whole surgical procedure in a patient with microspherophakia. And the surgery has to be done usually quite early. As you can see, this is nearly a clear lens, and these are conditions where a clear lens extraction needs to be done. Otherwise, this spirophakic lens is going to impinge on the periphery, and there's going to be a block, and the intraocular pressure is going to raise. So the most difficult part is puncturing this anterior capsule, which becomes the most troublesome and the most difficult part. And you can see that I'm using a counter technique to get that 26 gauge needle inside, because nothing is going to help puncturing this. So first puncture can be very, very difficult. It's like a deflated balloon, and a needle also has to have a counter traction. The next part is making a curved and a circular capsulorhexis, which again is difficult. You saw it in just about 5 seconds, but this one took me at least 15 minutes, because every time I was doing one part, the other counter traction had to be given by a ball dialer, and then another part, and then another part, and again refilling and filling with viscoelastic. You cannot fill too much also, because then the intraocular pressure can rise and you might have a runaway if a little bit of visco comes out. So the important part is doing this capsulorhexis, and it has to be neat circular. If the capsulorhexis runs out, it's finished. You just hand it over to your VR surgeon. So the next part is getting in those hooks. Now here, the capsular hooks will not work. And what is important is these iris hooks. Because of the short flanges, it's important. Here we are putting in the single piece intraocular lens. And again, as we understand that this bag, if we do not attach it and fixate it, it's going to definitely in the future, it's going to either come up and there could be a synechia, or it could decenter, and then you would have problems and maybe even have to remove it. So fixation of these bags, because the zonules are deficient, is mandatory. And here, the CTR will not go in unless you have a customized CTR, because the spirophakic bag is so small. What's important is these AMED segments. Now, you can see that the AMED segments itself, nearly circumferentially, are going to support nearly the whole bag. You can see the AMED segments there. And here we have the flaps, 2 flaps in each part to fixate the AMED segments. And with the fixation, this is it. So these are the two eyes of the same patient. One eye shows a lot of fibrosis, which was there. The other eye was much better. And, but the vision in both these eyes were all right. Now let's look at this next sister. And this lady presented to us quite late, about 5 years ago. And we are going to do something that the femtosecond laser definitely gives a big advantage. And here, the capsular rhexis is the only thing that we are going to do with the femtosecond laser. And you can see that it's a spherophakic bag in total. So you can see nearly the sphere that there is. You can see that it's nearly a round lens. And what we just need to do, and you can see the shallowing of the anterior chamber as well. So we always have to make a rhexis which is much smaller. This was possibly a 4.8 millimeter rhexis. And here you can see the rhexis now. So with the rhexis, you can see it is also not a full circular rhexis that a femtosecond laser does. Now this was my first case, and I want to show you this because again, all the parameters have to be set so that we have a good rhexis, but this is a postage stamp rhexis that we have made. And we'll do the Hoffman's pocket for this patient, which is a more elegant way of doing a fixation part. And with the Hoffman's pocket, and then we go in giving it the main port, and the rhexis has to be very, very gently taken off. And this also can run out if you're not gentle, because you can see that all those little postage stamps have to be actually negotiated to have this rhexis come out. Now, very gentle hydrodissection, and again putting in the same iris hooks. This nucleus has hardly any nucleus, and you just take it off with this. Just 1 more minute, sir. And then once that is done, the fixation is again important, and a single piece lens can again be placed in. So with the single piece lens, these patients, which are usually high myopia patients, can get a very good vision, and that's what we want. And you can see that the haptics of this particular single piece lens is so soft and well into the bag that it crowds in, and it actually circumferentially helps the bag retain its shape very well. And again, the same AMED segments can go in. With the AMED segments, the importance of having a proper maintenance of the whole area is very, very good. And once the fixation is done, the fixation again has to be very proper. The tightening of the sutures must be very good so that it tightens well and just optimally. And you can see that it is crowding into the pupillary area, but nevertheless, one has to have the fixations in place. So thank you very much for your patient sharing.
That was a wonderful talk by Dr. Partha Vishwan. So a lot of gymnastics done in that small capsular bag. We go on to our last speaker, Dr. Rajat Mathur. Yes, he is going to be talking on Ray 1 EMV toric lenses.
Good morning, dignitaries and the friends and colleagues sitting in this hall. Today I will be talking about the Ray 1 EMV toric IOLs. There is no financial interest. It is a journey from the quantity of vision to the quality and quantity of the vision. First we had this spherical lenses, PMMA lenses, spherical lenses, then aspheric lenses, then multifocals. Now we have extended depth of focus lenses, trifocals, and advanced monofocals. These are the modern IOL classification, but I am mainly concerned with the monofocal plus lenses. This is the basic classification which I follow. It is monofocals for distance vision, monofocal plus for distant intermediate vision, 60 centimeter onwards, extended depth of focus, EDOF distant intermediate, 40 centimeter onwards, multifocals for distant and near, trifocals for distant, intermediate and near. According to pupillary dependence, there are monofocals and monofocal plus lenses which are pupillary independent, and EDOF and multifocals and trifocals which are pupillary dependent. What is a monofocal plus lens? This is nothing but there is an elongation of the focal length of the monofocal lenses. It gives slightly intermediate vision beyond 60 centimeters. And how do these monofocal lenses are modified? This is done by mainly by two methods. First is a supple increase in the anterior curvature of the lens, which is done by Johnson Johnson Eyhance, and the other is by increasing the positive spherical aberration of the lens, which is done by Ray-1 EMV. Both these methods slightly elongates the focal length, thereby giving some intermediate vision, and as there are no central rings or humps, therefore it makes the pupillary independent. This is the design of the spherical aberration based optic design, and this is the high order aspheric optic design. Spherical aberrations occurs when all incoming light rays ends up focusing on a different point. These IOL based on the spherical aberrations can offer some depth of focus, but affects resolution and clarity, making it hard to obtain a sharp image. This is corrected in this Ray-1 EMV by blending of the longitudinal aberrations. And this is the only lens which can achieve a micro monovision type of thing. The other one is the refractive technology based on continuous higher order aspheric surface, and there are no rings, no zones, and not based on a spherical aberrations. How does the Rayner EMV works? It is an anterior spheric surface with unique center region induces controlled postural spherical aberrations, which extend the depth of vision. Blended edge reduces longitudinal spherical aberrations to maintain visual acuity and contrast sensitivity under low light condition. And non-diffractive design offers reduced dysphotopsia compared to the diffractive optic designs. Rayner EMV does not use diffractive light splitting optics. We can see the blue one is the zero spherical aberrations and the pink one is the Rayner EMV. So the patient should not experience dysphotopsia then with the standard monofocal IOLs. The patented Rayner EMV positive spherical aberration design works together with the natural positive spherical aberration of the cornea. Therefore, it maintains higher performance under normal levels of tilt and decentration when compared to negative spherical lenses. What is the effect of the positive spherical aberration? First, the patented Rayner EMV optic maintains monofocal quality of distance vision. You can see the blue one is the monofocal lenses and the pink one is the Rayner EMV. While uniquely redirecting both myopically, to extend depth of focus for excellent intermediate vision and hyperopically 0.3 for the wider landing zone. This 0.3 which you can see is the quality which can be used for making it for a micro monovision type of thing. This high quality vision, enhanced monovision and rotational stable Ray-1 toric platform. What is enhanced monovision? When offsetting the second eye for monovision, the depth of field now reaches past the intermediate. You can see with the first slide, it's a micro monovision, 0.5 diopter difference is there. The depth of height is passing the intermediate distance. And the hyperbolic extension of the unique patented allows patient to maintain excellent binocular vision. You can see the shaded portion with the what is 3. It maintains the excellent binocular vision when you're doing a micro monovision. This is the emetropic picture. When you do a dominant and non-dominant eye, you get a intermediate beyond 60 centimeters for both eyes. But when it is a binocular vision, you get slightly better than that. With this, when you do a micro monovision type of thing, it's a mini monovision when you are having a minus 0.5D diopter in the other eye. Modest if -1 and full monovision is -1.5. This is the box of the preloaded EMV toric, and you can rightly see the biometry, the A constant is 118.6 and 118.0. But when you go to ray trace toric calculator, it is the method is being used. There is no mention of the biometry, so you can easily put the method which you are using. It's a contact or a optical or a immersion. So it will give your readings. And you can fix a target refraction as well. For the first eye, you can fix a emetropic, a dominant eye, or for the second non-dominant eye or the second eye, whichever you take, you can fix it for -0.5 or -1 or -1.5. And you will get 3 results. One will be slightly hypermetropic type, first one, other will be emetropic, and the third one will be a myopic one. So in my practice, I usually take the middle one for the first dominant eye and the second one, third one for the other eye. I have been using these lenses for last 12 to 14 years, but since last 12 years, when they have got this patented for the 360 degree M1 Apple square and square, there is no PCO. The PCO rates are much decreased. And it has got one of the finest preloaded injectors. I haven't used anything better than that. Huawei is comparable, but this is one of the best I have ever used. Visual outcomes, 82% gets 6:6, but 100% gets 6:9 and above. For intermediate vision, it is 100% for N8 or N10, and 87% of eyes for N10 for the near visual acuity. 94% patients are satisfied with 6:6 or 6:9, and 50% are completely spectacle free if you do a micromonovision type of thing. Key takeaways is significant cylinder reduction with the torics, distance visual acuity similar to those expected from the monofocal lenses, intermediate range of vision is good, near vision is good when we do both eyes, predictive refractive accuracy and patient satisfaction is very good. This is a small video. You have to go to do the markings while the patient is sitting in the right posture in the slit lamp. After that, in the OT, you have to mark again to reconfirm, and you have to mark that point of incision. I have to do it at 125 degrees. The lens which I has used had a 5-degree cylinder axis to be done. I marked the 5-degree cylindrical axis. Normal phaco is to be done. Good rexes. And the lens has to place in the bag. And the axis has to be aligned. It's a 5-degree or a 6-degree. Very clear marking of the lens. And this was the result. Next day 6:6 on the right eye, and this was the picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much for detailing on a Ray 1 lens. Do you have any experience on that, doctor?